Flux is constant change you don't control. I help people and leaders and teams and organizations better understand and navigate a world that is in flux.
April Rinne is a change navigator, speaker, investor, and adventurer. She's ranked one of the 50 leading female futurists in the world by Forbes and is author of international bestseller, Flux, 8 Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change.
Flux doesn't just mean change or uncertainty. My entry into a world in flux, my baptism, goes back to when I was 20 and I got the phone call that no one ever wants to get or expects to get. I have one older sister who called me and informed me that both of our parents had died in a car crash. What do you do when you don't know what to do?
How do you pick up the pieces and continue?
I will say, and this far more is in flux today than is not. It's about how we approach constant change and uncertainty that we don't control.
People expect that there is a change A and it starts finish.
It really comes down to what we've been taught about change management. It's a helpful tool in our toolbox, but it is totally incomplete for where we are today. 70% of change management initiatives fail.
What should people adopt so they can change easier?
This exercise is often extremely helpful.
How does one get unstuck in a career?
I like to encourage people.
How does a portfolio career start?
So, gosh, the way I start.
I very vividly remember how I read your article about give people portfolio careers, not career paths. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this woman is saying what I'm thinking. And I published it on LinkedIn, and I was so surprised when you said, thank you for publishing my... And then I started looking at your profile, etc. And here we are today. Amazing. So April, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm absolutely honored to have you on my podcast.
Delighted. Thank you, Ani. And maybe I hear from people from time to time. They're like, you crawled in my head. How did you do that? Right. And I think a lot of what I'm doing is I am tapping in definitely to a zeitgeist, something that I think is bubbling under the surface for a lot of people, but we don't have the language for it. We don't have the words. We don't have the societal acceptance of it. And so a lot of these themes, as we'll talk about, I think I've been working on, for 10, 15, sometimes more than 20 years. But I think that we're having this moment in time where it's like they're finally arriving. There's finally enough people saying, we got to change, we got to do it differently. And there are enough different experiments and openness in the world to rethink how we live and work and lead and thrive. And so trying to help other people connect those dots.
Exactly. It was just in a matter of 1 year, I can see a huge difference. Before, not a lot of people knew what is portfolio career. Now, people reach out and say, oh, can you tell us more about this? What is it? How does it work? Even here in Europe and even in Eastern Europe. So it is changing fast. But let's start with a big question. What is your mission, April?
Well, insofar for purposes like this conversation, and I can give the 30-second version, I can give the 2-hour version, but my life purpose is to leave this place a little better than I found it and to help others in many different ways. But, really the tagline for me is that I help people and leaders and teams and organizations better understand and navigate a world that is in flux. And so flux is my tagline. Flux is one of those really fun words. Flux doesn't just mean change or uncertainty. It means that constant, relentless, will never stop change and uncertainty and unknown and all of that. And that's something I've been, again, working on for more than 25 years. But needless to say, the last few years, I think, have given people a crash course in not just what that feels like, but how hard that is for many people to really accept and to grasp and to find their way through.
And if we go back and in your early life experiences, What were these pivotal moments that influenced your life and career choices, so you become what you are today?
Yeah. This is a great question, and I think especially relevant for our conversation, because it's not the stuff on my resume. It's not the stuff on my CV. It's not the stuff that we typically look to. It's interesting, and just an interesting story I can share here is that most people today, like professionally, they would call me a futurist. So I'm really scanning a lot of what's affecting the world, the macro forces that are affecting the world. I'm working with leaders and organizations. I have my law degree. I have my finance degree, whatever. But I started getting this question about, like, why, as a futurist, why do you see the world the way you see it? Like, it's a little bit different. It's a little more inspiring. It's a little more holistic. I can't quite say I like it, but it's not typical. And from that point, that was several years ago, that was the point from which I really started telling a different kind of story of, like, what do you do and why do you do it? And if I really unwind the clock and I go back to, when did I get really interested in this world in flux, future in flux? What do you do when you don't know what to do? Sure, I can point to being a futurist and having degrees, and there's a business kind of head-centric way of talking about that. But for me, it was much more personal. It came from the heart. And it goes back to when I was 20 and I was at university. And I call this like my entry into a world in flux, my baptism. And when I was at university, my third year at university, I was studying overseas. And I got the phone call that no one ever wants to get or expects to get. And my sister, I have one older sister, who called me and informed me that both of our parents had died in a car crash. And right there, like, that was my moment. That was that seed where, like, my whole world changed, right? Everything flipped upside down. My family, my sense of self, my identity, my sense of mortality, how I saw the world, what I was going to make of my career, like taking care of myself, everything just flipped upside down. And so, that's, I like to say, I never would have imagined back then that I would write a book about this, and the book isn't about me, but it's very much informed by that. And so for the last many years, I've been not just figuring out my own path through flux, but I've been taking really good notes and paying a lot of attention to a lot of people and cultures around the world and societies, and like, how do people do this well? And it's fascinating for me because no one has figured it out, but maybe we get into this, but there's wisdom everywhere. There's so much we can learn from one another, but for the most part, we haven't connected those dots. And so anyway, that's a little bit about my background. I know for many people, some people watching and listening, like, that's a really hard topic, death and grief and loss and like both parents. And I'm here not to, and I actually welcome these conversations. I love talking about it. I mean, love is a strong word, but like, I find it's not so much about me. I'm okay. I've made my way through. It's more a point of human connection, where it's something I think we can all relate to. Either we've been through our own version of real difficulty, or we know that it's coming at some point and we want to be ready for it. So I offer it in that spirit.
This is such a traumatic experience. I just can't even start to imagine what it is. How do you pick up the pieces and continue? How does this happen?
It's a great question. And I'll be, I hear from people often of like, how did you do it? Like, what were your secret tips? Like, I had some kind of magic recipe, or that there's a right or wrong way to do something like this. And I like to offer myself up as kind of like exhibit A, we say, which is like, I was an experiment too. To put this in context, when my parents died, I had never known death. So it's not like I had been through it before and I could practice. I was beginner. And on the one hand, that meant I had truly no idea what I was supposed to do. But on the flip side, what it also meant was that I didn't have any preconceived notions of what I was supposed to do. I will say, and this is very bittersweet, but the more time passes, the more sweet it becomes. I will say that losing both parents, that's like I didn't know anybody who had lost their parents. So I was in this kind of category of my own, me and my sister, right? And what you found was that people actually gave you a lot of leeway because they didn't know what to do. They wanted to help, they wanted to support, but I didn't have people, thankfully, and I know this isn't the case for everybody, but I didn't have people saying, you can't do this, you shouldn't do that. They were like, we don't know what to do either, but we do know, and this, maybe we'll talk about this a bit later as well, it all comes down to just human relationships. And it comes down, I was completely vulnerable. I didn't pretend that it hadn't happened. I didn't immediately go back to school or to university, or in this case, if it were today, to work. I just paused and was like, nothing's going to be, very little I think in life will be more difficult than what I have to get through right now. And so I'm going to make it my number one priority. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm going to be open. And I'm going to let other humans try to help. And I'm going to learn how to trust. And I'm going to do the hard work of grief. And I'm, there's a saying, the only way out is through. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to distract myself. And I don't know to this day, like, there's that sense of what possessed me to do that. I think losing both parents and realizing, and they were young, they were healthy, they shouldn't have happened. It was a car crash, like a freak car crash. It made me realize just how precious my life was and that it could have happened to anybody. And so I will say it gave me this incredible motivation to live my life as fully as I could. But when I say fully, I don't mean, I'm going to have as much fun as I can possibly have because I don't have long. It really was about service. It was like, I got to leave this place better than I found it in however long I've got. It might be a week. It might be another 80 years. And that led me to really see other humans differently and really focus on a career of service and a career of meaning. And also, I should just say, maybe we'll get into this too, really questioning a lot of the expectations and assumptions that society put on us that we don't really know where they come from. And they're often these days not that helpful for people. And so I started testing a lot of that as well. I could go on. I'll pause there. I know we have a lot to cover, but
no,
anyway.
that's we can talk about this till tomorrow. It's such a big topic. Let's talk about your career a little bit, just to give a little perspective for people who are listening and watching. What are the different careers you had? Because you changed, right? You said you studied law, you studied finance. If you can just walk us through.
Yeah, and again, I sort of apologize, but I think it'll take a little longer, but it'll get us somewhere richer and deeper to take back to kind of like how I grew up and what was even on my radar before my parents died. And then there's always this question of like how much of it was because like I experienced this huge shock that made me see everything differently, and how much of it is like, this is who I've always been. And I've always been somebody who is interested in not A or B, but like, what happens when you put A and B together? Or you're going to give me a menu of like A, B, and C. Well, what if we got creative and curious and came up with a better solution? That might be D, E, or F, right? And growing up, that was me. I was always interested in many different things. Both of my parents were educators. So I come from a family in which we didn't have a lot in terms of like money or stuff, but it was always about education and travel. Those were the two things we were allowed to spend money on, truly. And my dad was a geographer. So also this sense of maps and globes and people and cultures. So I share that because even before, like, I knew it was going to be hard to pick one thing to specialize in. I knew that I wanted to try a bunch of things. And though I will say, because I suspect other people have felt this way, I got pushback for that. I got pushback saying, if it had been today, it would be ADHD for sure.
Yeah.
No, I don't have ADHD, but it was like, you're scattered, you're distracted, you can't focus, what's going to happen? Then my parents die. And so you can imagine, oh no, now what is she going to do? But it was very clear to me that I had to take care of myself. So my parents were never my backstop, but that was gone. So there was a seriousness. On the one hand, I had to be really serious about making sure that I could take care of myself because I didn't have any other options in that regard. So that's a baseline. And though I also had this very clear sense that, well, you could say I didn't have any parental pressure that I had to go and be a doctor or a lawyer. Like if I could find a way to make it work, I could go do it. And so I share that because as an undergraduate university, I ended up double majoring and minoring, studied political science and economics and art history and all these different things. And then I did a joint degree, a law degree and finance at graduate school. But it was always with this idea of I'm not going to just go do one thing. I want to try this and then apply it over there and apply it over there. And I didn't know exactly how those dots would connect. I just knew I wanted to see that bigger picture. And so my career actually shouldn't say started. This is another story. I started my first small business when I was 8 years old. So by the time I graduated from high school, I had a little bit of, knew how to earn some income and whatnot. But after university, which included my parents' deaths, I had professors and mentors saying, oh, with your degree, you should go work at an investment bank or a consulting firm and start climbing that ladder. And I had this allergic reaction to when that was said. And it wasn't about any disrespect for investment bankers or consultants, not at all. It was this very clear sense for me, and I want to be clear that I don't want to speak for anyone else, but my story is that I was like, if I'm going to die tomorrow, the world, I can do more than be an investment banker. There are more people out there that need help and service and seeing the bigger picture. And so after graduation, I went and did probably certainly the most fun job I ever had. It wasn't a career, but it was to achieve that broader goal. I was a hiking and biking guide. And so 6 months of the year, I guided, which again, to be clear, was not enough income to raise a family, was not enough income to pay a mortgage. But for where I was in life, it was plenty of income to travel the rest of the year. And so I spent 4 years guiding and traveling with the goal of seeing how as much of the rest of the world lived as I could so that I could figure out how I could best serve. But I bring that up because that's probably the favorite piece of my portfolio that people gave me they were like, this is crazy. Your resume is going to, explode, blah, blah, blah. Not realizing that one job taught me more than an MBA. It taught me more about humans and culture and the kinds of things you can't put a monetary value on. And it continues to serve me to this day, even though today people go, how do I go do that? Right? It's quite funny. But anyway, I did that, and then I did law, and then I did finance, and then I did technology. And then I should say for the last 11 years, I have been independent, meaning that I'm an advisor and a futurist, but I do a lot of different things, and each year looks a little different than the last.
Very interesting. And I relate very much to what you said about travel. I come from Eastern Europe, and I was born behind the Iron Curtain. So we couldn't travel. We were just boxed out there. And while your family you spend money for travel and you were traveling, and that was one thing that you did. In our family, we didn't because we couldn't. And I just so much wanted to travel. I have to find a job that takes me, that allows me to travel. And that was my drive throughout my career. I say this to people and they don't believe me, but I just really, that was what was driving me. Should I take this job? Okay, so where am I going to travel with it? All right, in Asia. Okay, I'm taking this job. I haven't been to Asia. So that's how my life was.
And I'll add to that, my guiding experiences after college, that was my real international excursion. So I grew up, my dad was a geographer, but we didn't have money to take flights or stay in fancy hotels. And I love to remind people of this, like, where do I start? I want to travel. I want to see the world a little bit more, that sort of thing. And there's so much even around, in our own backyards that if money is an issue, or sometimes mobility or family obligations, that sort of thing. With my dad in particular, like that was all, we grew up, and again, I'm in the US, so that sense of like, what are the different treasures that different places have. I wasn't flying around the world or going to Paris for spring break. No, none of that. We were in my parents were hippies. And so we had a Volkswagen bus. We had a little van, and my dad would do research in the national parks. And so my early travel experience prior to college was overwhelmingly traveling to be in nature and hiking and camping and appreciating the diversity of the cultures that were in those areas, right? And however, like you, I had this sense of like, there's so much more out there. Like, this is interesting, but give me that plane ticket and get me out of here. And so the guiding opportunity was really the one that made that more practicable and made it, sounds like for you too, something that I had not control over, but something that I was doing as opposed to family or society was dictating for me.
Yeah. Well, I guess that you mentioned it, that a lot of people were pushing back throughout your career because you were just not like everybody else. You couldn't fit the mold. So how did you deal with this? It's not an easy place to be.
Not at all. And, I always have to remind myself and others, like the people who were pushing back, not all, but most of them really cared. They weren't being mean. What I was saying I wanted to do was freaking them out. And in particular, after having lost my parents, I had a lot of people, like they were worried. Is she going to be okay? And that's, there's professionally, but there's also like, is she going to be okay personally? Will she emotionally be like, they cared. And they saw me doing these things like she's going to go guide trip. Like what? She should be closer to home so that we can, see her and check in on her. And they were worried. So I get that. And I actually deeply appreciate not all of the pushback, but some of it, because it really forced me to think about this hard and to get clarity on what was I really after, and was I just trying to escape something, or was I really going after something that made more sense to me and would allow me to be a better version of me? And so I bring that up because how did I get through it? Like that kind of debate and those sounding boards, like the role of a sounding board, the role of a mentor. The role of a mentor is not to tell you that you're amazing and that you should just keep doing what you're doing. Like the role of a mentor is to help you see yourself in a broader light. And so I had to, it forced me to develop not just self-awareness, confidence, clarity. Also in my case, like I needed to make sure I could that I had a budget, and was this going to work financially? And you don't just decide something sounds interesting and go do it. Like I had to have a plan and maybe a backup plan. And so, it took a lot of inner strength, which I didn't have it to begin with, but I had to learn to build it. And the other thing, though, that I just have to bring up, which I think is something that applies to all of us, wherever we are in life, it goes back to that question I mentioned earlier, which is after my parents died, and to this day, like I asked myself the same question this morning. It's part of my kind of daily ritual. But that sense of, if I were to die tomorrow, now, I don't want to, I don't expect to, I have no intention of that happening, but nobody knows. If I were to die tomorrow, what would the world need me to do today? And the world, not my ego, not a boss, not social media, like what do I feel called to do? And so I bring that up because as I was plotting through, how do I respond to some of this criticism and some of this pushback? I was really driven by that sense of like, and maybe this comes up later, like, will I regret not trying this? Like, I might regret doing this. Not everything works in life. That's true. But I'll definitely regret not trying. And like, I don't want to live a life that's half lived. And so that inner dialogue was incredibly helpful. And then you start experimenting and you start meeting people who are doing their own thing or their own version of what you're trying to do. And then you realize, oh, I'm not actually alone in this. And then you build, you find that tribe, and it becomes easier with time.
Let's talk about the concept of flux. Can you explain what it is and how it relates to the future?
Yeah. Flux. One of my favorite words. Surprise, surprise. It's also a very fun word. Maybe we'll talk about like fluxiness and being fluxy and what the flux. I mean, there's a lot we can joke with here. But so this word flux, I mentioned earlier, it's not merely change or uncertainty. Flux is constant, relentless, like, when will this ever improve? When will this ever stop? Change. And so what's fascinating for people who like language, I know you do too, it's actually both a noun and a verb. So, and I learned this in my research long ago, but I love sharing it because we usually think, and in English, flux means continuous change. So not just one thing that changes and you respond to it and move on, but like always changing. It also means, it's also a verb. And so to flux means to learn to become fluid. And so I love this because there's this kind of like flux and flow and being able to just like, as things are changing, kind of just adapting as you go along. For those people on the listening in, I always have to mention too, there are also terms that relate to chemistry and metallurgy and engineering. So flux is also, it's a binding agent. If you have a piece of jewelry that has a gemstone in it and then it has metal around it, flux is what solders beautiful things together. So I love bringing this up because in my search strings, flux will show up a lot of other ways, usually continuous change, but there's something quite beautiful about it's an ability to actually see beauty through the chaos as well.
You said that the flux is a continuous change.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with it?
There are, two concepts, one of which has subconcepts. One is what I call a flux mindset. So it's the mindset that we need to approach this. And then there are what I call the 8 flux superpowers, which are the practices and skills that help you put this mindset into action. So happy to talk about that. I do want to just pause, like good tee up for this is one of the ways I'll frame it is like far more is in flux today than is not. So flux is more the rule than the exception, even though we try to do everything we can to convince ourselves otherwise. And whenever I'm meeting somebody or talking to a group, I always like to say, like, I don't know what one individual person is dealing with. Like, I don't know the details of your life. I don't know the details of your family. I don't know the details of your career. And so many different things are in flux, right? Personally, professionally, organizationally, societally. Some people would say civilizationally these days, right? Everything. And so I always like to say, I'm not going to assume that I know where you're at. I will simply say, I know that everyone is struggling with one or more of those aspects. And so take from this conversation, take from this mindset and these superpowers, what works for you. Meet it where you are, because what I've found is there is something in it for pretty much everybody. So do you want to go into mindset and that sort of thing? Okay. Yeah. So mindset is, one state of mind. You can think of it as I think of a flux mindset as your mental muscle for change. Some people like to think about it as the operating system that's in their head. Other people like to think of it as the narratives and stories and kind of like just how we process and filter information. All of those things are valid. I come from a place in which for most of, not human history, not all of it, but much of modern history, we have been told by society, consciously and unconsciously, that humans can control what happens to them. We can be the creators of our lives. We can sort of have agency and power over other domains. And I'm not downplaying the power of humans and humanity at all, but that's not really fit for today's world. And so if you look at change, and I hear from people like almost every day, they're like, I love change, I hate change. What's going on with change? And to keep it short, the flux we're talking about is about change, but it's not about the changes we choose, the changes we opt into. I'll be in a new relationship, I'll get a new job. This is the change we don't control. So back to what I was just talking about. Flux is constant change you don't control. And so that's hard for a lot of people. And what I call opening a flux mindset. So a flux mindset is the ability to see all change. And here I mean especially the change you don't control, the changes you didn't see coming, the changes you wish would go away. It's the ability to see all of those changes as opportunities to learn and to grow and to improve. So it's an acknowledgement and the state of mind that says, I know that change can make me better. And I know that if I lean into this, I'm going to learn something new about myself and the world. So not rocket science, much easier said than done, right? And I often get people asking like, well, wait, growth mindset, isn't that growth mindset? And it very much builds on the concept of a growth mindset, which simply says, and so if people are familiar with growth mindset, fixed mindset, growth mindset acknowledges simply that our state of mind can improve and evolve. So like we are not static beings. So you need a growth mindset, the sense of I can change and grow and improve in order to open a flux mindset. But the flux mindset piece, the real uniqueness is it's about how we approach constant change and uncertainty that we don't control.
When I speak to people about change, because change is one of the topics I also like and I advise people on it. But so people expect that there is a change A and it starts, finish. Okay. And then is a period of no change. And then is a change B, start, finish. So that's what people have difficulties understanding, that there is no such thing as A, B, and then pause and A, B. No, there is all the time, non-stop, something is changing. And if you have to think about start and end, you're not going to get it. At least that's what I feel.
Right. I love that you bring this up, and maybe we riff on this for a little bit because you've just walked straight into another thing. I don't know if you've read the articles I've written, but I've written several articles on this theme of it really comes down to what we've been taught about change management. So this idea that when I hear a change is going to happen, it's going to have a beginning and an end. I'm going to respond to it. Then nothing's going to change. And then I'm going to go on and then something else will change. But like there's a process. And I'm going to tick the box. When this change is done, I'm going to tick the box. I'm going to go to the next step in our process or procedure, right? And I say all of this very respectfully. That is a classic example of change management. We're just going to manage these changes and they're going to come in and we'll put them in the box and we'll work our magic and they'll get. And again, helpful tool for some things like, I don't know, a factory line, something, like it comes from the industrial era. But change management, it's a helpful tool in our toolbox, but it is totally incomplete for where we are today. And so I talk about the need for a change mindset rather than change management, or rather use change management. But if you don't come in with that mindset, the change management, 70% of change management initiatives fail. This is a key reason why, because we walk in thinking if I just put it through our process, I'll be done. It's like, no, it's far more fluid, it's far more fluxy than that. So I love, I think those people with more of a change management approach to Flux struggle a lot because they haven't put the effort into the mindset.
Let's go back to Flux and let's talk about the superpowers. What should people adopt so they can change? Can I say easier or adopt the Flux mindset?
Yeah. So opening this Flux mindset, this sense of like my relationship with change, constant change can improve. That's step one. And then you're like, well, how do I actually do that? Or how do I put that into action? You put that into action by practicing it, right? And you have to practice strengthening your mental muscle, just like you have to practice strengthening physical muscles. And in the process of strengthening that mental muscle, you develop these superpowers. And so there are 8 of them. Each one is a chapter in my book. Each one of them could have been the topic of this entire conversation. I do think we probably, the career portfolio is one of them. So I think we probably want to focus a little bit more on that. And that one's unique. I'll call out, each one is unique for different reasons. But each superpower pulls on a different theme that a lot of people deal with. So one of them, for example, is about the pace of change and just like I'm just constantly running fast and frazzled and burnt out. And so there's one that if that's your deal, go to chapter 1, the superpowers called Run Slower. There's another one though, for example, I'm just really uncomfortable when I have to go beyond my comfort zone, when I have to stretch, like not knowing really, I can't do it. And so then I would say, go to chapter 3. That one is called, it's the power of getting lost, which is, getting lost for many people means failure. It means fear. It's something scary. Getting lost is about learning how to be comfortable in discomfort and how we build those skills, and travel comes up and other things. And then there's another one on trust, and there's another one on letting go and acceptance.
One that I'm interested in is know you're enough, because I think people don't know what is enough for them, and I think that is the source of a lot of issues, because you don't know when to stop and not push yourself further, right? And I think it's very, very important quality to have. Can you talk about this one?
I agree 1,000%. And again, like we could go into any of these in more detail. I love that you've brought this one up. And I find that in conversations like this, just sort of teeing up, like if it's pace, if it's not knowing, if it's an issue about control, if it's an issue about the future of work and your career, like there are all these different avenues you can pursue. The one about knowing you're enough, really, it's about the challenge of living in a more society, which I'll come back to in a minute. But it's really fundamentally about how do we find balance, harmony, peace, happiness, some would even say, although we can get into what happiness really means. And happiness isn't that feeling of like joy that comes and goes. Happiness is also contentedness, a sense that like, I am at peace. I am okay with what is, even if life isn't perfect. And so when we think about what it's like to live in a more society, I like to remind people, and a lot of people simply aren't aware, like we haven't always lived like this. Most of human history was not about more. And when I say more, it's not just more money or more power. We live in a world in which your value to society is often deemed as related to more clicks, more clothes, more cars, more likes, more followers, more whatever, right? It's nutty. And it's making us pretty miserable. And you only need to look, like the younger you go, the more clear that becomes. And here, there's a huge role for social media. There's a big role for mass market consumerism. We start getting into some of these trends that are more societal. But this is really about helping people see what, in my experience, many people haven't really thought about. We're so bombarded by messaging every day of what we should do and have and be. And the subconscious message is that you are not enough and you will not be enough unless you earn that salary or buy that product or drive that car or whatever. And that's completely backwards. And so it's the superpower is about understanding, knowing you're enough. And that means your point of balance and harmony, but it also means figuring out where in your life are you, I call it over-indexed. Where do you have too much and where do you have too little? And what I often find is, at least in Western society, so it is global, but it varies. Even globally, there are differences. But this sense of, in today's consumerist society, we have way too much stuff and not enough like love and respect and dignity in our lives. We've over-indexed on things that we can put into dollars or euros or, currency. We've over-indexed on things we can buy, and we've under-indexed on those things that have no price, like love, like trust, like respect. And so I help people, there's a diagnostic in the book where you go through, like, what is your enough? And what if this haven't you really thought about life before? And what you find is it's not just better understanding. You can think about this financially, budget-wise, relationship-wise, how you spend your time, all of that. But the goal is to help people start to recognize that you are enough, just as you are, always have been, always will be. And what does that enough look like that brings satisfaction and happiness? Not the quest for like, I'm never going to be enough. Because when you're always after more, and I don't care what the more is, but when you're after more, by design, you will never have enough. Because if you think about, I'm after more, what happens when you get more? You need more and more and more. And so it becomes this vicious cycle. So that's what that one's about. And we can riff on that more if you'd like. But
let's go into the portfolio career. And I would like to start with the first thing. We're talking about so much change, and change normally brings a lot of new opportunities. And in the same time, many more people feel stuck in their career. They just feel that they're frozen in time and nothing is happening. The world is like going in the amazing speed forward, but you kind of feel in one and the same place. So how do you explain this paradox or phenomena? How do I call it?
Flux is full of paradox. And I love this sense of motion and stasis, this sense of, I talk a lot about your relationship to change, like the people who are best suited to change. It's the ability to be both grounded in like knowing who you are so that you can actually expand and try something new. And so there's a lot, I think right now, it's funny, people are changing even more than they might realize. And there is a stasis, there is a kind of inertia that if you're not paying attention to your well-being, if you're not paying attention to your curiosity, if you're not paying attention to the new things that are happening all around you every day, period, I mean, that you can definitely feel stuck. But there is, I mean, it's an awareness thing. And I find often, particularly when people spend a lot of time on their devices, they feel like the whole world is changing through their phone, but they're just sitting there. And it's like, well, if your relationship to your phone is that everything is external to you, then yeah, I can see how you might be feeling like you're missing out on something. But why don't you follow through with some of those changes? How about you allow that your curiosity, which will be piqued by something, follow through with that? And so, I think there are different angles depending on who the person is. Sometimes there is this sense of inertia and a lack of, I don't want to say lack of awareness, but a lack of investment in one's own inner well-being. And once you start sparking that feeling of, am I changing, can actually come quite quickly. There's also another dynamic, though, that's going on. And I bring this up because the paradox can come from a few different places. And that other dynamic is fear. And I think there are a lot of people, when they are afraid of either a change that they see, or they are afraid of, they feel stuck, and what do they do about it? There's a fear that creeps in that is really good at paralyzing us from taking change. Now, of course, not doing something is also, as we would say this in the law, like taking action is an action. Not taking action is also an action. It is a decision you're making, and you may be making it consciously or subconsciously, but understanding your relationship to fear and when that might actually just be putting effectively a log jam in your brain is also a necessary step on that journey.
How does one get unstuck in a career, let's say? So I've been in a job for 5 years. I don't see the future. I don't know what else to do. What is your advice?
Yeah, it's wonderful, Ani. Like, there's not a silver bullet. There's not like, here's the answer, here's the checklist. It's fascinating to me. And I know, again, I advise lots of different kinds of teams and organizations. And I'm keenly aware, though, of the fact that I have not worked in a large organization with a lot of bureaucracy personally for years. And part of why I left organizations was I wanted the flexibility. I wanted, if I was curious in something, I wanted to just go explore it and do it and build something around it. And so I find a lot of times that sense of, I just don't see the future, because you're stuck in an organization that doesn't necessarily see humans as humans, but it's like there's an org chart and you're stuck somewhere on it, and I can move this way or that way, but not that way. And so I like to encourage people, if they can, to the extent that they can, like, get out of mentally, get out of your own way, get out of your own body and your own skin for some time, just in terms of like, you don't do this when you're in the office, but that sense of what is it that really brings you alive? What are those things that originally attracted you to the job that you currently have? What is it? How do you spend your time? I mean, this I'm sure you do with your clients as well, that sense of getting down to those values of what is it that makes you feel most alive at work and in life? And if you could do anything, what would it be? And what are the things that you dream, if someone was not paying you at all, what would you actually do? Like, you're trying to get people out of their own way so that they can see themselves almost as if they were external. So they can look at them and, there's that wonderful saying of like, treat yourself or give yourself the kind of advice that you would give to your own best friend, right? We often are our own worst critics, but then we give our best to our friends, and just being really curious, not judgmental, but curious about that. And what's fun, and I'm going a little bit into the career portfolios here, but you find it's less and less and less about having a particular role or having a particular title or having a particular like line on the resume. And it really comes down to certain skills and certain ways you like to spend your time, what you're doing. And then when you look at what you do from the perspective of what brings joy and what the skills you have that you're really good at, then you start recombining what you might do from a skills lens as opposed to a role, position, title, salary, gotta climb up or down, and that's the only latitude I have.
So a portfolio career, you started talking about it. Let's dive into that. How does a portfolio career start from your point of view? What are the first steps?
And again, it's funny. Number one, and I'll just keep saying this, it's come up already a couple times, but like, it really is driven by your curiosity. And I say that because it's just you cannot come into a portfolio approach with a fixed mindset in that it must look like this, it must be 3 years or 5 years or this organization. Open-mindedness and curiosity. And I should also mention, this has been fun over the last few years, where depending on who I'm talking to, sometimes people like the idea of a portfolio career. So like the portfolio defines my career. And then other people are like, it's a career portfolio. So I'll use those terms interchangeably. Career portfolio, portfolio career. When we're talking about career ladders, it's much easier to talk about career portfolios, career ladders. They compare much more easily. But if you talk about my portfolio career is your journey, your kind of that narrative. So, gosh, the way I'd start, and this usually comes up later in the conversation, but I always love to remind people. So every person, whether or not you've ever had a job, whether or not you've ever been paid for that job, whether you're currently working or not, whether you're a student, whether you're retired, doesn't matter. Every person on the planet has a portfolio already. Most people don't realize it, but everyone has one. So like, where do you start? Start with understanding what you've got. And in that portfolio, it really is a much more holistic view of all the things you can do that add value to society. And so depending on who I'm talking to, like, where do you start? I often say, like, start with what is in your portfolio today, which is different and much, much, much more than what's on your resume. And so we start getting into, sure, you want in your portfolio all the jobs you've ever had, but it's also anything you've ever done that adds value to society. So the big one that often comes up, parenting. If you are a parent and you have not just brought other humans into the world, but you have learned the skills of time management and conflict negotiation and empathy and compassion and surprise and all the rest that come along with parenting, that's totally in your portfolio. Those are skills that are valuable in so many other contexts also beyond parenting, right? If you've been through hardship or tragedy, I mean, in my case, the example I will often use of my life is like losing both my parents. That's not on my resume. Like, there's no space for that on my resume, yet it absolutely not just empowers what I do, but it's unique value that I can add to other organizations, other teams, and so forth. So that's in my portfolio. So I love to ask people, and often what we will start by doing is just taking stock of what's in your portfolio, and then you get into more sort of strategic design of your portfolio. But first, understanding what are all the things, and I should mention too, for somebody who's feeling stuck in their current role, this exercise is often extremely helpful. Some people have called it even cathartic, because they realize that there's so much more of them that they're capable of doing that they're not harnessing, they're not activating, they're not putting into use on a daily basis. So you start that process of kind of self-exploration.
And you're a futurist, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the trends you think will be the most common ones in the future of work? What should we prepare for?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And that's where the career portfolios comes up, where again, I've had a career portfolio for 25 years, and that was never a term that I would use with other people until the last 2 to 3 years. But now I use it with organizations, and I can map it onto multiple macro forces defining the future and the future of work, right? I think the big one, and again, it's not one single force, but people often say, like, what is the future? What does it hold? The crystal ball. And I will never get into the business of predicting. That's not futurism. But there is this sense that it's all about what and how you see. It's what you're paying attention to, what you're noticing. And the future is, I mean, I know we just talked about enough, but the future is more of everything. And what I mean by that is, in the workplace, there will be more ways to work and earn income and contribute to society than ever. And I say that simply because this assumption that we are all going to be employed and have jobs that have schedules and salaries, that is just crumbling before our very eyes. It doesn't mean it's disappearing. It's jobs and employment are absolutely still part of the picture. No question about that. It just means that that's one option, one piece of a much bigger and more diverse pie. So the kinds of trends that I'm looking at are independent talent. So and what I mean by that is not just freelancing. It's not just the gig economy. We're talking about highly skilled, highly qualified independents running their own businesses, sometimes working with organizations as consultants or advisors, that sort of thing, but not being full-time employees there. That is going to continue to grow, I think, globally. I think with jobs and again, here you have some differences depending on markets and labor laws, but more of the expectation around job hopping. I don't like seeing a lot of what I'm seeing, like the mobility of, like, I'll just spend 1 year here, 1 year there, 1 year here, 1 year there. That can be challenging for long-term career development, but I do think we're going to see a lot more flexible, a lot more unpredictable tenure in jobs. And my hope, and this is a bigger trend, I hope we're in the early stages of really redefining what job descriptions and credentials even look like. And this idea that, like, I'm going to be hired into this role and I will do these 10 things and anything beyond that I won't do. Like, that is a very outdated model for a world in which technology is changing fast, skills are changing fast, and we need to actually have a more emergent view of what any job is, what any job description looks like. So that's more on HR, but I think it applies equally to talent in terms of how we see our growth and our evolving. So that if you expect that you're going to do profession XYZ for the next 5 to 10 years, I think that's a very dangerous and risky assumption to make. So those are some of the bigger picture talent themes I see playing out.
All right. And if our listeners who are, or people who watch, are in the beginning of their careers, what is your advice to them? Where should they go? Should they aim to go in a big corporate or startup or start portfolio careers? What is your advice?
I love this. Well, one is, again, back to portfolio careers. Remember, you already have a portfolio.
Yeah.
You will continue to curate it. If you get a job at a startup, or a big company, or you do your own thing, or you take a gap year, or that's all part of your portfolio. So there's no harm whatsoever. You can't make, in many ways, I like to say, you can't make a bad choice so long as you're following your curiosity and so long as you feel drawn to that particular kind of work. So, Ani, it's hard. There is, whether you go to a large organization or a small organization or a startup or a nonprofit, it's less about that, because you can find meaningful, fulfilling careers, vocations. You're going to be learning skills everywhere you go. Like, that's much more like, where are there people that you feel really inspired by and who you think you can learn from, and where you actually think you can contribute and grow? Like, that's it. And I know that can happen at startups because I see it happening all the time. I know that can happen at large organizations. I see it happening all the time. It's really about, is there an alignment of the things you care most about, the people you'll get to work with, the openness with which they treat, openness and respect with which they treat you. Like, is this a place where you feel like you will be able to grow? And then it's not like you don't let go of everything else. But what I mean by that is, if you find those initial criteria of the people, the mission, the space to grow, pour yourself into it and let it unfold, let it emerge. This idea that, like, I need to have learned all these skills in the next 2 years, and if not, then I won't know what I'm going to do. It's like, just pour yourself into it and the future will reveal itself to you. And that's very hard for a lot of people to do. But at the same time, that's what's Fluxy. That's the people who are going to thrive in this future of work. That's the skill, that's the superpower that they have. And so I will just say, like, again, my own experience, if you had asked me 25 years ago, what are you going to do in your life? Well, for one, I was never going to be a lawyer. I was definitely going to work internationally. I was never going to write a book. You go through all these things, but like, on the whole, I never could have predicted what would have happened. And yet where I am today, I really wouldn't want to give it up for anything. And I go back to, like, my 20-year-old self, who was very much trying to figure things out, but didn't have that same perspective. I'm so glad what she thought she wanted to do didn't work out. Right. And so that's when, if I go back to when I'm young, starting out, have the open-mindedness and the again, that beginner's mindset and that flux mindset, that, like, let life reveal itself to you far more than saying it must be X or Y or Z. And if it's not, then my life is somehow a disaster. Not at all. It's actually quite the opposite.
Great. Let the life reveal to yourself. Oh, that's really great. And one last question for the people who are in the mid of their career and they see a complete and utter change. I mean, they started something and now this something is not there anymore. And especially even with AI coming in, they had a job with 10 things they did. Now 5 things are not done anymore, etc. And they're completely and utterly lost. What should they do?
Yeah. So this is where that career portfolio diagnostic is super powerful. And what I mean by that is that if you've taken the approach of that your career is a ladder, and that's totally fine if you have, a lot of people have, I did that, that's what I was raised thinking as well. The challenge that we face, and again, this is another one of the macro trends that I'm really interested in and a little, concerned about in a healthy way, which is, in a world in which skills are changing fast, a ladder is actually risky. It's risky because if something knocks your ladder over, if that job you thought you were going for no longer looks the same or no longer exists, it's very hard for your ladder not to fall, or for you not to fall off that ladder, right? Versus a portfolio, which isn't about up or down. It's this holistic collection of everything you can do, like an artist portfolio or an investor's portfolio or a manager's portfolio. Like, it's a collection. You start looking at all the things you can do and you start remixing them and you start rejigging. Well, wow, I could combine those skills and go use them in this way, or I could expand into that sector, or I could pull this skill out that I haven't used for 20 years and apply it with this one. And And a lot of these relate also to the human skills. And so if you're mid-career and you're worried about that, you need to take stock of what other skills are in your portfolio. So again, do that diagnostic and get out of the thinking about jobs and roles, but into skills-based learning and skills-based value contribution. That will open up different opportunities, different ways of seeing what might be your next role. It would help you also if you want to start your own venture. I mean, mid-career, you frankly have more options available to you because you have more in your portfolio. But it does require a more holistic, there's more to deconstruct and reconstruct, as I like to think about it. Like portfolios, we're kind of reverse engineering your resume, reverse engineering your CV. But in doing that, you actually discover a lot about yourself. You discover a lot of skills that might not have been on your resume or might have been buried. And it tends to be quite empowering from that perspective. So I would start with that. And recognize that what you're experiencing now with like skills changing and not knowing what's ahead, that's likely to increase moving forward. So the sooner you can get comfortable with a portfolio approach, the better it's going to serve you for the rest of your career, the rest of your life, frankly.
I just want to finish with this hour passed. I don't know how it passed so quickly. And there's so many more questions I have, but we can't stay here forever. I just wanted to ask you before we go, if you look at your journey, what has been the most significant challenge in adapting to constant change? And how did you overcome it? How did you deal with it?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question. And I'll speak from my experience. I can also say that I know from research and from experience also with others that it's not unique to me. I think often the hardest thing to do, and it's different than confidence, it's trusting yourself. So this sense that and trusting yourself, trusting some people would call it your intuition. Some people would call it your inner compass, that sixth sense. What I have discovered in my own journey is that I've always had a very strong sixth sense that I put aside for a long time. Because I couldn't explain it and you couldn't put a number on it. And it was just, my intuition. And what I continue to learn is that my intuition about myself is really good. And I think that's the case for most people. The challenge is that we've buried it. And so one of the things that I've struggled with a lot, but I've gotten better and better at it and cannot underscore it enough, is this idea, this ability to trust yourself. And to trust, and again, it goes back, we'll kind of come full circle. At the end of the day, no one really knows. No one has control over what happens. So this sense of, if I check in with my intuition, I'm not sure about trying this new thing or starting a new project, or could be for somebody leaving a job or starting a new job, whatever it may be, I just don't know. But that sense of, will I regret doing this? And I listen to my intuition, and it's usually like, well, maybe. Like, you don't know it might not work out, no one knows. So maybe, but then I ask myself that question, will I regret not trying? And my intuition, it is always clear as day that if it's something I know I want to do, it's like, absolutely. And what I've learned is when I trust that piece, it has never served me wrong. It has never not worked out in a way it was meant to. That usually means it didn't work out the way I thought it was going to. It worked out in somehow better. So again, intuition, inner self-awareness, trust in yourself. And because when you have that translates directly into self-confidence. That translates directly into clarity. That translates directly, I hear it from other people, that translates into a kind of magnetism for other people. They see you show up more fully for everything that you do, and you become a little bit of a magnet for the kinds of things that you want to do.
Amazing. So I'm thinking about everything we spoke about, in the last hour. And one topic comes as a common topic is that you have to be very well aware of yourself and you know yourself. And once you do that, everything is possible.
Along with other stuff. Well, and I love this, Ani. You're spot on. And again, it doesn't mean that life is perfect or that you get all these magical answers. Doing the work is part of the beauty of being alive. But what I find is when we try to assume that like the answers are to be found out there, everything's external to us, and we need to find it out there, and then we will be complete. It's like, no, you're already complete. You need to find it inside because it's there. But we've done, and I say we, society and media and, information overload has done an extraordinary job of burying this or making so much of this fuzzy and blurry and not visible to our own selves. But it's there. And the only person who's going to find it is you. But the beautiful thing is, it's yours and it's yours forever. It's not someone else's. You find it, you hold on to it, it's yours, and it will serve you well from here on out.
What a great way to end the podcast. April, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was so interesting talking with you on all these topics. And thank you for everything you do. Your work is really, really amazing. Very, very interesting. And I wish you absolutely all the best.
Thank you, Ani. Same to you. It's been a pleasure.